Have you ever said something you thought was totally normal, only to get a really weird look back? Today, we're going to dive into 3 phrases that do exactly that, exploring the super interesting and sometimes hilarious gap between Filipino and American English. Let's get into it. So, let me ask you this. Do your words always mean what you think they mean? It seems like a simple question, right? But when you're talking to someone from a different culture, the answer is almost always, nope, not really. And that's because language is just packed with these hidden cultural codes, which is exactly what we're going to unpack today. Okay, before we go any further, I want to make something super clear. Our goal here is not to correct anybody. Filipino English is an absolutely rich and valid dialect. What we're doing today is more like creating a translation guide. A way to tweak your communication just a bit for an international audience, so your message lands perfectly every single time. First up, we've got a phrase that can cause some pretty serious and, let's be honest, hilarious confusion. At first glance, it sounds like a medical emergency, but as you're about to see, it is anything but. So, just picture this for a second. You're in a meeting, you're talking about some really complex stuff, and your Filipino colleague suddenly says, "I'm having a nosebleed." Now, if you're in the US, you'd probably start frantically looking for the first aid kit, right? But you can relax. The real meaning is something completely different.
And here is the amazing difference. In the Philippines, saying you're having a nosebleed is this funny, kind of self-deprecating way of saying, wow, this English is so advanced, my brain is short-circuiting. But in the US, it's a literal cry for help. It's a perfect example of a great figure of speech getting totally lost in translation. So what do you say instead if you want to get that same idea across without sending everyone into a panic? A simple, "that's a bit over my head," works perfectly. It makes the exact same point that you're struggling to keep up in a way that's crystal clear to an American English speaker.
All right, let's move from a physical reaction to a mental one. Our next example shows how one little word we all use, imagine, can take on a completely different job depending on how it's used. You'll hear this a lot in the Philippines, usually right after someone tells a wild, unbelievable story. And it's not a command, it's an exclamation. It's pure shock and awe. And here's where it gets really interesting. In Filipino English, just imagine is a reaction to something that already happened. It's about the past. But in American English, it's an invitation to think about the future. A hypothetical scenario that hasn't happened. 2 totally different directions. So to get that same whoa factor across in the US, a much more natural fit would be something like, "Can you believe it?" or "That's incredible." Those phrases really nail that feeling of amazement. Okay, our final phrase isn't really about a big misunderstanding. It's more about what just sounds natural. It's a super common, super friendly way to invite someone to do something in the Philippines, but it might get you a slightly confused look in the US. So you're making plans for the weekend, maybe to grab coffee or see a movie, and you turn to your friend and ask, "Are you game?" In the Philippines, that's the absolute go-to for seeing if they want to join. Now, this one is a lot more subtle. Unlike the nosebleed situation, an American will probably figure out what you mean. The thing is, while they'll get it, it just doesn't sound quite native. It's one of those little tells, because there are just way more common ways to ask the same question. Instead, what you're going to hear almost all the time in the US are phrases like, "Are you up for it?" Or even simpler, "Are you in?" Or "Want to join?" Those are pretty much the default settings for making plans. Okay, let's pull all of this together. We've gone over some tricky but really useful stuff. So here's a quick recap to add to your cross-cultural communication toolkit. So let's do a quick-fire review. If you're feeling overwhelmed by complex language, just swap "I'm having a nosebleed" for "that's over my head." If you're completely shocked by something, trade "just imagine" for "can you believe it?" And if you're trying to make plans, "are you up for it?" is a fantastic substitute for "are you game?" At the end of the day, this is what it's all about. Language is so much more than just words. It's culture, it's context, it's about connection. And when you start to understand these little nuances, you're not just avoiding some awkward moments, you're actually building much deeper, stronger relationships. And that brings me to you. Think of language as this giant treasure map of hidden meanings and cultural quirks. What are some of the most surprising ones you've stumbled upon in your own journey? I'd love to know. Thanks for tuning in.